Malaysia's service economy is very internal. It's like the US.
Yes.
Right? So why do I say Malaysia is like US or ASEAN? The Malaysian economy is very, draws a lot of parallels to the US economy. It's very diversified, relatively speaking, right? It has a huge internal service contribution, right? It is not hostage to external forces, right? And the government, because of this, right, the double-edged sword is that you get low growth because it's so diversified, but the government is more or less in control.
Before we begin the podcast, have you gotten your free ebook? It's called the Build a Six-Figure Portfolio Guidebook. Now, inside it, we share with you the tips and tricks to bring your stock investing skills to the next level. The best part, it's only 10 pages long and it's totally free. Whether you're on Spotify or YouTube, the link to download is in the description, or you can go to www.firl.co/FREE or www.firl.co/free.
Alright guys, welcome back to the podcast. It's going to be an interesting one today. We will be talking about Malaysia's GDP, and we have with me co-host today, Mr. Leon,
Hello.
badminton coach. Why is he here? I'm not sure, but you know, it is what it is. And we have a returning guest, which is Mr. Aaron. Welcome back to the pod, Aaron.
Hi, very nice to be here again.
So, Aaron wrote an article on Substack about where he broke down Malaysia's GDP and how it is the highest, I believe, in ASEAN percentage-wise. But you know, these are just the headline facts, and we like to drill a little bit deeper. I heard that, you know, this growth is a bit, some people are saying on Twitter is a bit fake or misleading because, there's EPF allowed withdrawal, so that's why private consumption is high. As usual, there will be a lot of skeptics on every time there's something good about Malaysia, immediately there will be some skepticism trying to, pull it down. Whether it's legitimate or not, I guess that's where we have to dig into the data. But so Aaron, like, how do you look at the 8.7%, FY22?
Yeah, so I'll get into that. But before I start, let me just say, right, I have a lot of respect for the work done by both our economics minister, Rafizi, as well as BNM Governor Shamsia. So this is my opportunity to do a cold call. Right?
Yeah.
I would love to have coffee with you guys if you allow me.
Yes, and I will also follow up with my own cold call. We would like to have you on the podcast as well. Maybe Aaron, you can join us if we do get them.
Yeah, then I'll be sitting on your side. Right?
Yeah, you'll be sitting where Leon is sitting. Yeah,
sure.
And maybe Leon can sit here. So.
Yes, sure. Okay.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, maybe break down on some of the key points about this GDP. Is it real? How much of it is real? How much of it is just once off and, not so real?
Yeah, sure. So actually, everything is on my blog. Right? You can go to valueinvesting.substack.com to read, the summary here. But, I'm going to show you some stats, right?
Yep.
So that will actually make it a bit more interesting. And what we can basically see is that, okay, maybe I'll give a bit of context. So in Malaysia's 4Q GDP, right, we grew 7%, right, and which brought the full year GDP to 8.7% because 3Q was a whopping 14.2. And if we actually look at my article, right, the particular chart is all the way at the bottom. Okay. So there's a chart here, right, at the bottom article, and you can see that this is Maybank's research, right?
Right.
This was done immediately after 3Q, so it doesn't incorporate 4Q data. But you can see from a yellow highlights, right, that the main contributors to 3Q's GDP and also the forecast, context being that 3Q is the major contributor to the full year forecast, was three things: private consumption, government consumption, and net exports. So if we go to the GDP formula, it is Y GDP
Yes.
equals to C plus I plus G plus X.
Yep.
right?
Net
C,
exports. Yeah.
right? C is consumers, I is investments, G is government, X is net export. So you can see government and net exports here. And interestingly, is private consumption, which is C, right? And I to a certain extent, that is just C only, which actually contributed the most. You may see the exports and imports being higher, but imports actually deducts from GDP.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Because GDP is a value add figure. It is only what activity which happens within the borders,
Correct.
as opposed to GNP, right? So exports minus imports is actually a negative figure per their full year forecast, which may have changed by now, but still, the largest contributor was actually private consumption, right? So I actually talk about
So one way to look at it is that one has to take the exports and imports, kind of combine them together and net off each other. So if I eyeball it correctly, it's basically 2.9, negative 2.9,
yes.
correct?
So let me just digress a little bit. The reason for that is because a lot of exports are just two things.
Yes.
E&E sector, which is basically semiconductor value chain, and oil and gas sector. So on the E&E side, a lot of the imports are used just to produce the finished goods for the export. So there's a direct correlation. Oil and gas, we all know that, there's a spread played by the government, which is that they import sour crude and export our own production of sweet crude.
Yep.
So again, there's a direct correlation, right? It's just an offsetting thing. So that is why Malaysia's net exports is not a large or material contributor to GDP, right? It's really either private consumption or government. Yeah.
So what do you think of the criticism that, the private consumption is really not sustainable as a result of people withdrawing from EPF, spending it in the government, in the economy?
Yeah, sure. So actually, if you just eyeball it, right, you can see that. So the last one was 14.2%.
Yeah.
Right. And to be clear, we're good just eyeballing it. But if you take an average of private consumption and government consumption and also exports imports, right, you will see that it's more or less roughly around like 9-10%.
Right.
Right. So that means that the low base effect is attributable to the gap. Right. This 9-10% is a legitimate one. Whereas the remainder 3-4% is more due to low base effects.
Right.
As opposed to the low base effect being the most of 3K's GDP. Right? So low base effect was only more or less 1/3 of that 14%. Right? Or if you were just eyeballing it. And anyway, we all eyeball it anyway because you can't really be precise about this kind of thing. Right? And I also want to clarify something, right? So you can see that government consumption was 8.6, private consumption is 11.4. It's very tempting to say that private consumption was a true leading data here, but we have to also be cognizant of the fact that the government stimulus of the previous quarters could have a lagging contributory effect to private consumption, right? So you talk about petrol subsidies, right? You talk about withdrawals of pension funds, right? Those could also contribute to private consumption. So the figure here shouldn't be taken as like a hard science data.
Of course.
Right? But having said that, it's also technically correct to say that private consumption was the main contributor to the past 2 quarters of GDP growth.
Right.
Which implies it is a legitimate recovery from the pandemic.
Right.
Okay.
So we can see that the expectations for 2023 is going to be a lot lower.
We'll go into that later because you need a lot of context, but yes.
Okay, great. So any questions?
Yeah. So according to your latest news letter, in light of the recovery of the private consumption, you mentioned that it's a sort of a Keynesian recovery, right? Maybe you could expound a little bit more. What do you mean by a Keynesian recovery?
Sure. So in the old days, right, we started with a branch of economics called Austrian economics, which basically just observes the natural laws of economics. So supply and demand. Then there are a lot of problems with that, right? So eventually we came out with something called the next generation, the Keynesian approach. Which basically says that government should step in, right, to alleviate the pain of the economy. So you do that by stimulus. So the theory is that compared to the Austrian economy, okay, so Austrian is like this, right? So good time, bad time, good time, bad time.
Yeah. Just let it
be like, Keynesian basically says that during bad time, the pain is too hard to bear. So government should step in because it's the only guy who can step in out of the G, I, and C, right?
Yes.
And recover it, right? And then during the good times, you pay down the debt, right? So on a net basis, you should more or less mirror the Austrian approach. Now there are a lot of problems with that, but that's beyond your question. So that's what Keynesian means.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's quite interesting, especially for there's a little bit of economics education for our listeners.
And Keynesian is actually the current status quo. Everyone does it now.
Correct. Even the lingo, right?
Yes, and part of it is because it's much more political acceptable to practice a Keynesian approach than an Austrian approach.
Yeah, I mean, I do read up a little bit on what Austrians do, and it's very hard for people to say the solution is do nothing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, just imagine if during COVID, right?
Yeah.
The government, central banks of the world just say, okay, we're gonna hands off. Let the nature take its course.
Let the market forces do its job. Right?
Yeah, we would probably still be in a deep global recession by now.
Fair enough.
How about what would you say in the long term?
Okay, so the problem is that
you're talking about decades, right?
Yes. In fact, we don't even need to go decades. We just talk about like 2 election cycles. Right? So Keynesian approaches, in theory, you should pay back during good times. But in practice, it doesn't happen. Because there's a 4-year election cycle in most democracies.
Correct.
Right? So when you are supposed to pay back, right, then it doesn't get paid back.
Right.
So you see this in all the major democracies, right? Democratic capitalist societies. For instance, the US, the UK. Now, one which has done it really well is Australia. They actually do a proper Keynesian approach, which is during good times, they pay it back. Right? I haven't looked into why, but they do. And then it works really well, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you know the statistics. You heard before that Australia hasn't really been in a recession for 20 years, right? Recession defined as 2 negative quarters consecutively. But
so negative quarters of GDP growth, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But so Keynes wasn't wrong. It was the execution of it that is abused.
Right.
And to be fair, right, it's difficult not to.
Yeah. So I mean, before I move on to balance of payments, like what do you think that Malaysia, I guess, is on the right track?
Oh, do you?
Because a lot of people are forecasting recession, and I always like to say Malaysia is in a 40-year recession now, because everyone says that everyone starts their story with I got out, I started my job when it was during a recession. So I'm like, if everybody else says that, I don't know why. When is it actually not a recession? I mean, that's the Malaysians. A lot of Malaysians say that, right? So at least in my group of friends and family.
So that's what I hear all the time.
Yeah, we hear all the time, right?
Yeah.
Economy bad, this, that.
Sure. No, I think it's important to recognize that Malaysia is a raindrop on the global map.
Yes.
Right? We are basically a small cap in terms of like business analogies. So we are not really or our governments are not really truly in control of our destinies, right? When the global winds blow, right, we follow. So for instance, there's a lot of made up about the Asian tiger heydays during the 90s. That was a foreign debt fueled boom bubble, right?
Right.
It is really not accurate, I would even say, to use that as a baseline for what the average is like, or even what the trend line is like. That is the top of the bubble at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And it's important to understand the Malaysian economic health in the context of the global economic trajectory. Right. So for instance, the current COVID scenario, right? There's a lot of factors to go into, but basically our policymakers cannot make decisions independent of the external environment.
Yes.
Right. We are just hostage to it. Right. Without going into a very lot of detail, it's important to understand that our policymakers can only do the best with what the cards are dealt with. Right. So to come back to your question about 40-year recession stuff, right? In fact, even the headline data doesn't really support that, right? For instance, 2008, we came out of it pretty well.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
2016, okay, we did as bad as the global economy. 2020, we did pretty well.
Yep.
Right? Again, because of a lot of Keynesian stimulus. Right. What else? I think the real baseline that most how would I say, most complainers have about our economy, right, is that it's 1997. That's when you're comparing us to, right?
Correct.
So 1994, 1997, Asian Tiger heydays, we used to be so good. Up to now, we haven't really grown beyond that much, right? It's very important to remember that was a bubble. It was a boom. It was a debt-filled binge, not just by Malaysia, but by the whole region, right? So using that as a baseline, I would say is a bit optimistic.
Yeah, and also like you use the word baseline. I mean, we're starting from a much lower base, obviously,
or even a trend line. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So how, like, moving on to balance on payments, I think this is another one that a lot of people like to talk about Malaysia negatively, and that is actually the, you know, FDIs and stuff like that, right? I know I just came back from Penang, and brand spanking new buildings and factories are already either just built finish or in the midst of building. So, and the names that are on those factories are foreign. So I don't see it like with my eyes as to why it's a bad thing, but perhaps you can share with us some of the data on the BOP situation.
Yes. So BOP is, you can effectively, okay, in economics, right, on a national level, it's not one-to-one, apples to apples with businesses.
Correct.
But I'm going to try and simplify it by drawing analogies, right? So balance payments can be sort of thought of your cash flow.
Yes.
Right? More or less. It's not accurate, but more or less. So the thing being that if you have a current account surplus, you are drawing cash in from other people, which you can use for your own development internally. For instance, China is a great exporter, great current account surpluses, right? That's money from outsiders into the economy. So it's a free lunch kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
If you are in large current account deficit like Turkey, right? That means money is coming out of your country, right? And as an isolated concern, your country is losing cash flow. Okay. So that is the context of it. So it's always better to have a good current account surplus, right? Then you can see that Malaysia's current account surplus was positive for both 2021, 2022, right? Which might explain why they can then use that money for Keynesian stimulus, as compared to, let's say, America, which is in current account deficit, and it has to come up with its own money to do all its Keynesian stimulus, right, at the country's own expense. And the current account surplus is made up of two main things, right? Goods and services, but most of the time is goods. Because if you think about what can be exported out of the country,
it's goods, physical stuff, like right? Manufacturing,
Correct. So, and you can see that Malaysia's current account surplus is almost wholly entirely contributed by goods.
Yes.
Which is going back to the two things. One is E&E and one is oil and gas.
Right.
So on a headline level, it's a really simple story. We have a lot of current account surplus, which we can then use outsiders' money or receive outsiders' money to do whatever we want inside the economy. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so current account surplus is the biggest component of the BOP typically, right? In more developed economies, the capital account, the financial account is very important. But in emerging markets, including China, I would say capital and financial account are less important. As you can see, the contribution is negligible, right? So what are the capital accounts and financial accounts? So that, again, like I said, current account earlier is mostly just trade of goods. Right?
Yes.
Capital account is representing your FDIs, right? Your investments. Just think of it as capex. It's easy to remember. As contrast to current account, trade of goods, which is more of like a profit kind of situation.
Yes.
Your financial account is basically, I'm not sure how to describe it, like cash equivalents, right? So it doesn't really fall in the current account. It doesn't really fall in the capital account. So for instance, right, previously a capital account and financial account is together. Right? Now the capital account and financial account is separate.
Am I right to say that this is the part where, every time people complain that foreigners are selling stocks in Bursa Malaysia and they're taking it out,
portfolio capital.
That's where portfolio investment comes in, right?
Correct. Yeah, so for instance, you would have expected I expected a lot of the recent talk about FDIs, the Intel plan, the ECRL, and the revival HSR,
correct,
to be reflected in 4Q's capital account.
But
right?
It hasn't.
Which implies that there is probably more FDI contribution to come in the coming years.
I see.
So which is a great thing, right?
Yes.
Financial account, I mean, just don't hope too much, I guess, right?
Right.
It's quite small anyway.
Yes.
Yeah. So in Malaysia's case, it's really just a trade of good story, right? Not just a current kind of story, but a trade of good story.
One thing I
Which,
can get your
yeah.
thoughts on is, when people talk about foreigners selling their stakes, right, in Malaysian companies, that worries a lot of Malaysian investors. Does it worry you as investor in Malaysian stocks as well?
You're referring to stocks or
Stocks, yes.
not FDI kind of release
No,
kind of thing?
no.
Okay, this is needs a lot of context, right? So the answer is no, right? Because if you give me a time, I can actually explain how Malaysia is actually basically the US of ASEAN, right?
We will get that right
Yes.
after the end when we compare it with other countries. So keep that thought. Any questions before I move on to the next
No,
one?
not for now.
Yes. So if you're comparing us to the likes of the developed economies, right?
Yes.
Obviously, Malaysia might look a little bit trailing,
Yes.
but including Singapore, right? Keeping in mind Singapore is a city state.
Right. But hold that thought. We will come to that comparison with all the companies
Yes.
a bit later on. I just have a couple of things I want to touch before we go on to that.
Yes.
I think one thing that's definitely on people's mind is inflation and unemployment. I think that in Malaysia, because of the labor, the way our labor laws are structured, right, unemployment is actually quite hard to come by, and a lot of people, I'm going to say this in the nicest way, a lot of unemployable people end up taking emoluments from the government.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Sure.
So in that sense, our employment is quite controlled, right?
Yeah.
I think we are known for having one of the most bloated civil service in the world. But of course, as we know with inflation, all the big contributing factors of inflation is starting to some tank, some just decline, right? Energy prices have dropped. Shipping rates and transportation costs
Supply chain stuff.
also, supply chain stuff have dropped. We know housing is a bit of a question mark. Food, I'm not too sure, but I know in general, the general trend is that inflation is dropping. But what have you discovered looking in the Malaysian data and your own thoughts on inflation and the employment issue?
Yeah, so actually our inflation is relatively well contained. If you look at 2021 and 2022, it's averaging about 3%,
Yes.
right? Which is basically our historical trend,
Right.
So the reason is a lot to do with Keynesian stimulus, right? So for instance, there was a lot of petrol subsidies.
Yes.
That was a huge contributor to
Yes.
tamping down inflation in a way which doesn't show up in the headline data, right? Directly.
Correct.
And the egg subsidies, the chicken, right? There's a whole story about chicken stimulus.
Yeah.
But anyway, all these things contribute to lowering inflation,
Yes.
right? And it's important to also look at these figures in the context of global inflation, right? Like I said, Malaysia is not an isolated concern. So we import stuff, we export stuff, right? We are subject to the winds of global inflation. And obviously, yes, from an absolute standpoint, in isolation, Malaysia's inflation went up a lot, but it actually went up a lot less than the likes of the US, the likes of Europe, right? So relative to that reality, our inflation actually performed pretty well.
Yes.
Now, the reason is also because a lot of Keynesian stimulus. So that came at a cost of debt.
Yes, and that's why we'll talk about the current, the fiscal deficit later on. So hold that thought.
Sure.
But yeah, continue on inflation.
Yes, so inflation actually didn't really, and let's be clear, these are just official data, right? It's more or less not really aligned with like on the ground how you feel, cost of living, right? For instance, house prices don't really show up in
in the CPI,
right?
the basket,
Correct. So with that caveat, you can see the data is actually pretty decent. I mean, like 4%, like what's that, right? Relative to,
you can't really complain,
yeah. Right? You look at US, right? It's like 8%.
Yeah.
Right? Like today is what? Still 6, right?
Yeah.
So that's terrible. Okay, that's double. Right?
6.4.
Right. Look at even core inflation. So highlight to draw is core inflation was pretty much the same as headline inflation, which means that food and oil and gas did not necessarily contribute on a volume basis to headline inflation.
Right.
Right. Then moving on to unemployment. unemployment is low. I mean, honestly, 3.5% is the lowest you can get, right? Realistically. I'm hoping this is U3, right? It could be U6, I don't know. But
Sorry, can you clarify about U3 and U6? What do you mean?
U3 is a standard way of describing a labor force. Because there is the unemployment is actually a part of the labor force. You can see the word labor force on top, right? It's not a part of the population.
Yes.
So what does labor force mean? Labor force means that
the able working adults, right?
Working adults, including those not working, but it's still part of the labor force. So there are three categories of these people. One is
I'm going back to my econs class days already.
One is I'm also going back now. One is looking but cannot find. So that is engaged, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah.
There's depressed, which is not even trying to look, but not yet across a certain period before they fall out of the labor force.
Yes.
And there's one more I honestly can't remember. You just go Google your U3.
I forgot already. That's why I didn't do so well in A2.
So U6 includes everyone of the whole population.
Yeah.
And that includes the people who are like not even trying. Right? Like, you know, your guy who is living in his mom's basement playing.
So they are excluded from this discussion.
Yes, for a very good reason. Because if you're not even bothering to try, right? There's a good reason for it.
So to give people a sense, right? Malaysia has 33 million people. You're talking about, I'm going to butcher this, but 20 million of them?
We can literally Google it now. I don't remember, right?
Yeah, maybe you can Google labor force size of Malaysia. I forgot already. It's something along the line of 50-60% of the population.
Correct, but
could be wrong.
Generally speaking, there's no need to nitpick on this because when you're talking about large numbers like this, there is just no way to be precise about it. It's all
labor force participation rate, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, correct. 70% of 33 million is about 20 million.
Correct. And you have to remember that Malaysia is an emerging economy, right? So you have a lot of people who are not living in urban areas, right?
Correct.
And who are just not, you know, let's say you're helping your dad, right? Like doing something in the rice fields, right? You probably don't fall under the labor force qualification, right? Maybe U4, U5 kind of thing, right?
Fair enough.
So, but anyway, like I said, there's no need to nitpick on it. Just take a number at face value because it's going to be wrong by quite a bit.
So, any questions on inflation and unemployment?
No.
So,
are we moving on to fiscal?
No, we don't have to if you have anything to add.
Yeah, sure. So, okay, you can see that the unemployment rate was pretty decent, right? And I just want to add, right, that two things. One, there's a recent article by that Jeff Williams, the economist. If you want to meet up for coffee, right, feel free. He mentioned that there is the way they classify employed persons is anyone who has done at least 1 hour of work in the prior week.
Whoa.
Right. Okay. So that again, I
qualify.
May or may not. Actually, I think both of us probably not in the labor. We are in the labor force.
I'm unemployed,
but we are considered unemployed, right?
Nice.
Then
don't need to pay tax. Yeah. Whoa. Cut.
Okay. And then you look at your M1, right? It's like 10%, 4%, right? So US for instance was 100%. Yeah, right? Maybe 50% over 2 years, right?
40% of all M2 or M3 was printed in 2020 to 2022 or something like that.
Basically half lah.
Yeah.
And the previous half was printed during 2008. So if you really want to go into a really deep nerdy territory, right?
So let's stick to Malaysia.
Sure. So our M2 is like 6%, 4%, right?
Yeah.
So which is, it's fine. Which means it did not necessarily contribute a lot to Keynesian stimulus.
Right.
And part of that is also understandably because we are not a reserve currency.
Yes.
We are a small emerging nation. If you play with this, right?
We actually have to spend the money we make lah.
Yes, which is where the current account surplus comes in. So a lot of our stimulus was because we had good income, current account surplus. That was the source, including the likes of China.
Yes.
Right? As compared to say the US, Japan, kind of thing. Yeah.
Actually, that statement that we have to spend the money that we make, right? That refers to how we as a nation have to rely on consumption in order to sustain our GDP growth, right? So what is your stance on that? Like, do you think it's sustainable to rely on consumption? But what about other things, for example, like productivity? What's your stance on that?
Okay, sure. So Again, to answer your question, it is good to remember the context that we are a emerging market, right? So the baseline should be at the average emerging market level. We shouldn't be trying to compare with the developed economies.
Yeah.
Relative to that lower baseline, right? Malaysia is actually really, really good. That's why I call it the US of ASEAN. Why do I say this? First of all, we still have quite robust current account surpluses, right? And with the new semiconductor geopolitical significance, we are going to see a lot more current account surplus coming from that. And I say a lot, I mean
Basically
a lot.
FDI, right?
No, not this FDI is not current account. That's
Okay.
capital account. So both capital account as well as trade of goods.
Right.
Current account would be like the stuff we make here and sell for money lah.
Correct. So what we export lah, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So and then so on a current account surplus, which means income from foreigners, we are doing decently, right? But at the same time, we are also very diversified, right? So for instance, relatively diversified. For instance, we have pretty decent, how do I say, consumption economy, right? So our consumption economy is actually way ahead of China's from a per capita basis, right? From a unit basis, right?
Interesting.
So I mean, China's exports is still a very significant part of the economy. I can't remember what.
It's about 20 to 25% of the economy, something like that, I believe.
I don't really
GDP?
remember. Yeah, I don't remember.
Somewhere there, yeah.
I don't want to make mistake, right?
Sure.
So I'm just going to say that Malaysia's economy is
You
much more.
can Google like the exports as a
If you
percentage
feel
of
what I'm
GDP
talking,
for China.
you can find out.
Yeah,
Malaysia as well as China's
For China.
China, yeah.
right exports as a percentage of the GDP. And then so Malaysia has a really decent like consumption based economy,
Yes.
which means we are not necessarily
It's about 60%, of GDP. Correct?
quite. Yeah, I think it's
Right.
around there. Yeah, because
There you
services
go,
is about
20%,
50%.
2021.
Yeah.
Right. I remember all these numbers for no apparent reason. I don't know why.
So in contrast to, let's say, okay, let's talk about China, let's talk about Thailand. Right? Thailand, a lot of the 20% of GDP is come from tourism. It's like 18,
Other
19%.
people's consumption.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Current account, right? Then another large percentage is coming from the exports. So you know they do a lot of like hard drives,
Yeah.
a lot of like
The car parts and
food,
all that, yeah.
right? Car parts, right? Basically low value added manufacturing, same as Malaysia. Like. So that is another large part of income that is not really within your control.
Right.
So if the foreigners get in trouble, you get in trouble as well. Right? So Malaysia is quite well diversified away from that relative to most other ASEAN economies.
Right.
We will
And-
go really deep into this once we talk about after we talk about the fiscal account, because I want to get your thoughts on this
correct.
as well. So inflation, for those of you listening, although our inflation is controlled, we are really just classifying the risk in a different way. The way I see it is that instead of putting it under inflation, we're just going to call it fiscal deficit because the government is tanking this, right? And there is a cost to be paid because as the saying goes, there's no free lunch.
Yep.
It's just like in Germany, there's no such thing as free education. Yes, they say they're free education. Someone's paying for it, right? The teachers are not working for free, I would assume.
Yes.
The buildings didn't build themselves.
Yes.
And that will have, there's right now, I believe our fiscal deficit, for those who know, fiscal deficit is just the government's losses. It's about 6%. Am I right to say that?
Yeah.
It's about 6% of GDP.
You can think of it as yes.
And historically, pre-2008, it's closer to 4.
Yes.
And that's obviously a worrying sign, right? Because if the deficit continues, it means that either we have to raise taxes, we have to add on more debt, which affects fiscal the position in a different way. But what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, okay. So just to give you some numbers, right? So as you can see, the past 2 years, our deficit was negative, average 6%, right? Which actually makes a bit of more sense when you compare to the context that we have been in around average negative 4% fiscal deficits for the most of the past 2 decades.
Since 97 lah.
Right? So your fiscal deficit can be likened to ROE, right? So it's a loss relative to your equity. more or less, right?
For the government lah.
Yes. So your GDP is the analogous to
Yes.
here. And and obviously this is not sustainable. Right. So when people complain a lot about Malaysia legitimately, is that we are using a lot of debt to service growth, and our growth is also not that fantastic.
Correct.
It's like 4% GDP growth.
Yeah.
When you're using equal amount in terms of debt, right? It's not great, right? That is a legitimate complaint. But going back to what we were saying earlier, everything else is pretty average, right? It's okay, it's not calamitous. So to answer your question about deficits, right? In the context of inflation, so yes, there was a lot of deficits incurred for inflation, and that did help a lot. And yes, I think there's just no hidden context here. It is just not good because your government is tanking on behalf of private sector, right? But you also have to remember that this was done in a very tumultuous political environment,
era,
right? So from the policymakers' perspective, maybe that took precedence,
yes,
right? So that is the context we have, right? It wasn't just like the policymakers just playing around, right? But still, that still comes at a legitimate cost to the government,
right,
which is an increase in your debt to GDP, right?
right.
So government debt to GDP is currently officially is about 1.1 trillion. So that brings us to, let me just see if I can, okay, here. So it's about 1.1 trillion officially, right?
Yes.
Which implies roughly 63%.
63, yeah.
You can call it 65%.
There was the debt ceiling of 65%, right?
Correct. But if you add in, so that includes 808 billion of domestic government debt, right? Which means owned by domestic parties, and about 266 billion. 266 billion of external government debt.
I think this is a great point because I remember having a debate with someone on the US government debt. And obviously the US is 22 trillion US dollars, I think, or maybe more in government debt. But I remember doing very cursory research and it showed that about 2/3 of it was owned by their own people.
Yes.
Which meant that in a way 2/3 of it is still within and because a lot of people say that the US will start to owe China money. But then when you look at it, China only has about 3 trillion of the debt. Japan, something similar, which is like 10%, 12% of the entire debt only. It's not really that big, right? So it seems to me that Malaysia, in that sense, is a lot safer because 80% of the debt is owned internally, owed to people, Malaysians.
Yes, that's true. So when you say I think the debt to GDP figure is more understandable or intuitive in the context of seeing it as net debt to GDP, right? So like the Americans, they owe a lot of debt, but they owe it to their own social security.
Correct.
So basically, social security has cash. They lend it to the White House,
yes,
right? Executive branch. That is cash taken out of social security for the White House to be put into investments or whatever, right? And that is a debt owed by the government.
Yes.
But the cash was already within the country to begin with.
Correct.
So on a net debt basis, more or less like zero, right? Just in this example. And that is also Singapore's government debt to GDP situation.
Yeah.
So net debt is the more intuitive way to understand in layman's terms, right? So this is gross debt to GDP, so 63%. It's bad, but it's owed to within your own countrymen. Not taking away from the fact that it is still debt, right? It's still financial repression on the private sector, but it's not as bad as owning foreigners, right?
Yeah.
So if you own foreigners, come hell or high water, you got to pay, right?
Yes.
And that's where it's only 266 billion. So you can see, here.
I remember reading somewhere before, like there's some debt that the UK government is still paying for, like the 1800s or so. The UK, the British Empire, they're still paying off.
Yes, that's an annuity debt, sort of annuity version of that.
Correct.
War bonds.
That's
how they attract it, right?
No bad, a 200-year payback period.
But you have to remember something also. That is a nominal debt repayment, right? Based on, and then it has been inflated like over 100 years ago.
Correct.
So it's basically negligible already.
So is it really a risk, the 60% over percent debt.
I would say that 60% is pretty high for a small economy
Okay.
with no reserve currency status, right? I mean, 60% would be safer when you are like China size, right?
Right.
China's about 40, right?
Let's not go into
Public
like,
debt.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know it's another,
yeah.
just public debt. Yeah.
There's a really convoluted classification.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes. But anyway, sticking to Malaysia, right? When you are 60% and you're so small and you have no growth, right? So GDP growth is important because you can use the growth to pay back the debt,
Yes.
right? And also you can use the growth to inflate away the debt.
Yeah.
Right? So I would say 63% is as evidenced by the fact that we have hit the debt ceiling,
Yes.
is high, right? That's a borderline of safe approach already, right? But to be fair, you gotta remember that this was incurred during the past 2 years of COVID.
Correct.
I think very few people give credit to our global policymakers for the fact that we basically survived unscathed from the Black Plague, right? Like in 2,000 years from now, right? People are going to look back as a point in history about how mankind as a whole basically escaped unscathed from a Black Plague level of catastrophe.
Maybe they won't even know because there was not much. They'll be like, only like a few.
No,
couple
this
million
will
people
be
died,
used,
isn't it?
right, as a matter of survivorship bias
Yeah.
to justify overt Keynesian policy
Yes.
as a remedy to pandemic kind of risk, right? It will be used for a long time, right? People look back and say, hey, look, only 1% of the global population died, right? And honestly, we take it for granted. But if you go back to the uncertainty, which I still remember at the time, right? For the policymaker decisions, what we have achieved as a global civilization is nothing short of incredible.
Yeah.
Right? It is really incredible. Like seriously, we take too much for granted. And all the debt inflation has incurred since then. Personally, I don't speak for anyone else, but personally, I think it's a fair cost, right? Because it could have been a lot worse in terms of human lives. Just think about India during Delta, right? If that happened for the entire world, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah.
So, coming back to your question about government debt, I would say it's high. It's definitely high. And 1.5 trillion if you include the contingencies, right, which is your 1MDB stuff, right, as well as other liabilities like they have to give contingent guarantees for ECRL, HSR kind of thing. Then it goes up to 1.5 trillion. So depending on your, but that is normally not included in the gross debt figure,
Yeah.
gross debt to GDP figure. So at 63%, yeah, we're up here already. But it's not a ticking time bomb, right? Because one, if you look down, the public debt service ratio is 15-18%. So that is your interest expense as a percentage of
Yes.
right, GDP.
Yep.
And sorry, not GDP, as a percentage of tax revenues.
Revenues.
Not tax revenues, sorry, total revenues, right? That is not great, right? But it's not near either Japan or USA, which are like 100%.
Yeah.
Right. And also, the other thing is that we don't have any more risk headroom in terms of more Keynesian stimulus. So, for instance, in 2023, if the Anwar administration tries to increase more debt to, implement more stimulus to help the rakyat, I don't think that is a very tenable option. You're definitely going to get pushback from oppositions, legitimately, right? And also, keep in mind, we don't have a lot of GDP growth, right? 4-5%. I mean, it's okay, but it's not great, right?
I mean, the global context is already decent, right?
Yes, but in the context of paying back your debt,
Yeah.
right? This is effectively financial repression. Okay, it's not financial repression in that context, but it is reducing our capacity for more investments, more growth, right? So let's assume Malaysia is a single loan country in space, right? There's no US, there's no China, there's no external current account surpluses, there's no capital account surpluses. As an isolated matter, we got to pay back our own debt with our current GDP growth.
But of course, if you're isolated, who do we owe debt to? La? We are just there.
No, I mean, what I mean is that it's kind of difficult to see how you're going to pay back.
Yeah.
Right? One last thing I would say is, there was something in my head just now. One last thing I would say is that, the other thing I would say is that our reserves, okay, so this external debt figure here of 1.11144 billion
Yes.
is all debt, including government, households, and
Yeah.
businesses, which is the correct reference point to make when you're comparing to our foreign reserves.
Right.
right? Reserves are there to defend against short-term speculative volatility, right? You don't want the ringgit to suddenly pop, right? For your exporters or importers is really bad.
Yep.
So we have half of that, right? Which
Okay.
is pretty okay, pretty decent.
So, how do we get out of this? Okay, maybe I'll structure the question this way. What can we cut? And what can we add to revenue?
No, I think to answer your question, right, the answer is really outsiders. Right? So you know that Indo-Pacific is becoming of geopolitical significance.
Yes.
And you're going to see a lot of competing from the first world and second world actors for favor on our side, right? So as you know, Philippines has thrown its weight to US already, right? Malaysia, a bit more difficult to make a decision because we have a large Chinese population.
On the fence are just like, well,
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about money, right? Economics. But still, there's going to be a lot of competition from both sides to gain our favor, right? So, and because we are so small relative to the world, the contribution from outside is just going to overwhelm whatever we can do on our own, right? So I would say there is hope because of external, right? On the internal side, what can we cut? Let me think. I think
be
that
careful.
okay, we can definitely implement GST. That is really important.
Well, that's on the sales, the revenue side of things.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, just like you're asking revenue, income, right? And expenses, right?
Yeah.
So GST is definitely one. Let me see.
Wait, before we go on to the others, right? Let's talk a bit about GST. I don't know if you know the numbers on the top of your head, right? I remember when we got rid of it in 2018, the GST revenue was something like 40 billion.
I can't remember. Yeah.
Right, but it was big lah. But suppose it was 40 billion, like how much does that shave off the deficit?
No, in the sense that, okay, I cannot remember, right? Because you're talking about numbers instead of percent.
Yeah.
You can Google it and look,
Actually,
right?
Malaysia GST revenue. Right now the 6% deficit is how much loss? That's 6%.
Again, we can Google.
Can Google lah. Okay.
Well, maybe it's in that.
Okay, got it. Let's
the chart.
Google.
Okay, so just while we are looking, right?
Yeah.
The reason why GST is so important is because it improves efficiency of tax collection.
100%.
Yes, because it avoids tax leakages, right? Because how GST works is that, like VAT, each actor pays at every stage of the value chain, right, of the economy. So in essence, right, the downstream guy is also responsible for the upstream guy, right? In terms of everyone is related, right? So it's a lot harder to like do tax evasion on a single stage. You know what I mean? I don't really have a good example, but this is the theory.
Yes.
But anyway, it is well established that GST, VAT, these things are really good for tax collection.
Yes.
And I think, and the important part is that it's a structural change.
Yes.
There's a step change in terms of how much you actually can collect.
Yes.
Right? So the end game for all tax regimes is a GST kind of thing.
So I'm looking at the numbers, right? While Leon finds the GST revenue. Thanks to 8.7% growth, Malaysia GDP is about 390 odd billion. And if it's a 6% deficit, you're looking at 24 billion roughly of outflow. So you look, if we get rid of SST and we put in GST, in 2022's context, we would be able to wipe out the deficit because at 44 billion in 2017, right?
But you also got to offset the SST.
SST, correct. SST is about 20 odd billion or so, I remember.
Yeah, okay.
So you check SST 2022 revenue. So essentially with GST, we wipe off the deficit, we go back to zero. Is my math right?
If your math is right, yes. Right? But
Yeah, so
I
32
feel like
billion.
a bit uncanny valley. now.
Maybe it's about 0.5 to 1% deficit lah.
But let's just put it this way: you wipe out at least half lah.
Yeah,
So it's
minimum.
easily
it's
half.
basically 12 billion, additional 12 billion from GST,
Yeah, there you go.
roughly.
Another way to look at it
No,
is,
but you see, this one is based on SST in 2022, right?
Forecast, yeah.
Whereas the 44 billion GST was based on 2017 numbers, which is 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
So today the GST due to inflation and all that, whatever.
it's probably
Will
about
be
50 lah.
But yeah, 50 something.
So you got a net increase in 20 billion.
And also, I don't know how good the implementation was for the GST in the first time they did it. If it wasn't, it means that there was actually more left to be collected.
No, the beauty about GST, right, is that the model of GST in terms of tax collection is very organic and there's nothing to really enforce.
Yes.
Because every actor in the downstream is responsible for the upstream's collection. Right? If you really look into it.
Yes.
So it's an automatic kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Correct. So yeah, it would, for those listening, it would more or less wipe out a significant amount of our deficit. But of course, economics is not just about economics, it's about politics as well.
Leon, let me have a look at the pocket stats, right? So actually, if we were to look at the deficit, tax revenue, 233 billion. Then you have your non-tax revenue, 51 billion. So all in is about quite 300 billion, just to give them the benefit of doubt, right?
Yes.
So 300 billion, 233 billion, if you increase, something's not right? Not adding up. Your 40 billion of GST.
No, basically, if deficit is 6% of GDP, GDP is about 309. Oh, wait.
Right? Okay, anyway, let's
I was wrong. Sorry, you have to times 4. Sorry, the deficit is closer to 100 billion. Sorry.
Yeah.
Correct.
I mean, I'm going to be honest,
Your
I haven't
mistake.
really looked in the absolute numbers. I tend to think in the
Because
percentage.
394 was US dollars. I forgot.
Okay.
So it was 25 billion US dollars.
Yes.
24 billion US dollars. So times 4.3 or 4.4 right now would be like 110 maybe.
Yeah.
So 110, if we implement GST, we would probably shave off 40 billion, 12 billion off lah. Let's call it 20 lah, because we adjust.
Correct.
So we reduce it to about 4%, 4.5%.
Correct. And a 6% deficit figure would equal around 80 billion ringgit. More or less.
24 times 4.
The GDP is, so it's 6% of GDP, right?
Yes.
So our GDP now is about 1.5 trillion.
It's 394 US dollars. 394 billion US dollars.
Yeah, about that. 1.4, 1.5, right?
Yeah.
So
80 billion.
you work backwards.
Shave off a quarter of the
Yeah.
deficit lah.
I mean, anyway,
better than
we
nothing
just, yeah.
Better than nothing.
Yeah,
and then that grows also the GST, right? If we
Yes.
consume
No,
more and stuff.
importantly, the GST gives a huge revenue, a relatively huge avenue for incremental tax collection.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, how else will you just shave off quarter of your deficit overnight?
Yes.
Right? Like those things come with increased productivity growth,
Correct.
which takes decades. Right?
Correct.
So GST is good for the country.
So yes, not popular to say, but the math shows that. But how about other expenses and different ways for more revenue?
Let me think. I haven't really considered this question.
No, you're not a policy maker lah. You're an investor lah. So I don't expect you to have the answer also.
Yeah. But I mean, economists should know, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that, let me think. I don't really know what our expenditure is going to in terms of contribution.
Sure.
Right? I imagine a lot of it is going into capital account stuff, right? FDIs, PPPs, right? Stimulus was definitely a huge contributor in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And also don't forget we have non-government side of investments from the sovereign wealth funds, right?
Yep.
So I don't think there's a one-liner I can give.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so Leon, before I move on, any questions on this?
Not at the moment.
All right.
Okay.
So I think the last question is, why is Malaysia the US of ASEAN or even Asia? ASEAN, I assume, right?
Yeah. No, let's just stick to
That's
ASEAN,
very
right?
unique because I think Malaysia is quite a slept-on country.
Yeah.
economics wise. When you ask people, name me an ASEAN country, we are number 6. They'll name us number 6, right? It'll be Singapore, Thailand first, Singapore second, Bali third. Right? They won't know it's Indonesia, it's Bali.
Okay.
Philippines, Vietnam, Nam.
Yeah.
But Malaysia might not even be mentioned, right? Yet, when you look at per capita figures, we are only behind Brunei and Singapore, and Brunei and Singapore is not even worth comparing because of the size.
Yeah.
We are, we are an upper middle income country, and our per capita income is amazing.
Yeah.
For our developing status, and of course, as a Malaysian Chinese, if you isolate ourselves out and you compare relative to our GDP contribution, the Bumiputra in this in the country contributes about 17%. So you can do the math as to how much the Chinese contribute.
Yeah.
We are essentially, for Malaysian Chinese, we are essentially first world income already.
Yes.
So, but yeah, those are just my thoughts. But why is Malaysia the US of ASEAN?
Yeah. Okay. So this is probably our last question. I think you want to ask about budget also, right? On Thursday.
Thursday, yeah. No, I think we'll leave the budget for, but unless you want to talk about it.
Okay, it's up to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
But anyway, okay, I think it's important to understand the context of Malaysia in the context of the historical model of economic national development.
Sure.
Right. So I mean, just as a headline thing, look at the numbers here. Like Malaysia, all our neighbors are down there, right? Indonesia. You'd be surprised that Philippines is actually 13K. Right? And then Malaysia and Singapore is like all the way
Philippines not there, right? I don't see.
yeah, Philippines not there. I mean,
Right,
you can
right.
go and find another chart.
But they are quite high, yeah.
No, Philippines is really high up there. And then, which is very surprising because their population is only half of Indonesia. Indonesia is more or less. Malaysia is just skyrocketing above everyone else, including Thailand. And Singapore is obviously skyrocketing above Malaysia, right? But it's a city-state, right?
Yes,
So-
it's more apt to compare KL and Singapore.
Yes, correct. No, in fact, it's more apt to compare Singapore with the likes of like Hong Kong, Vatican
true.
City,
True.
right? In terms of actual countries, Malaysia's GDP per capita is the highest in ASEAN,
Yes,
right?
correct.
By a yard mile.
If you
know?
exclude Singapore and Brunei, yes, correct.
Yeah. So actually, if you think in terms of I think, right, where people are coming from when they say Malaysia underperforms, right, is that they are comparing with the leaders of the world, right? People who have had hundreds of years of economic development, people who are one is literally the hegemon of the world, right? Former colonies, Japan, right, and China today, right? That's not really a fair comparison, right? The real fair comparison is the absolute zero mark, right? And then how much we have increased relative to others who started at the same zero mark. So the zero bound here is probably the post-World War II environment, right?
Yeah,
Which
which is
is
debatable,
where-
but I can see it as a zero mark, yeah.
Yeah, so let's zoom out a lot. Post-World War II, right, is when most of your emerging markets today, right, really started on an equal footing. So your South Korea was a marsh, has no commodities. Taiwan was a dictatorship, right? Japan was flattened,
Yes.
right? Germany was flattened, right? I don't know. Vietnam was non-existent. Cambodia haven't even had their Khmer Rouge.
No atrocities yet,
right?
yeah.
So that's really the baseline that we need to compare. 1950, let's say, right? And how much each respective country has improved since then, right? Malaysia, why do I describe it as US of ASEAN? Is because it actually successfully graduated into the final stage of economic development, which is the service consumption economy, right? Because they have agriculture economy, you have your manufacturing economy, right, which is where China is today, and then you have your service economy, which is the higher margin element but lower growth than manufacturing, right? So let me think. Let's take the unicorn as a model, right, which is South Korea. So South Korea started as a complete marshland with no commodities in post World War II, post Korean War, let's say, right? And then you had the way it developed was I'll give the speed run version. The government partnered with the private sector to create your chaebols, right? Your chaebols are basically your symbols of corruption, right?
The untouchables.
Yes, because what happens is that you want to create a global competitive force like Samsung, right? To have the economies of scale to fight with your American right leaders, right? Like your General Electrics,
Even the
Fords.
Japanese guys as well.
Yes, correct. So obviously you need to accelerate the development of these chaebols because on their own they're just never going to compete, right? And then you have your protectionist policy, like the way Malaysia has huge tax tariffs on cars,
Yes.
right? In order to protect them from the outsiders, right? From coming in and competing. Then these chaebols, right? They have a lot of government help. So a lot of investment was made into your Samsungs, your LGs, right? To ramp them up to the point where they can be global competitors. And call it a spade. It's corruption. It's plain straight up corruption. And these guys to this day have so much influence on politics that like the latest arrest of what's her name? Lee Jing-hu. The last Park Geun-hye or something, right? The last president who was deposed on charges of corruption, right? As well as divination. Right? So the corruption part was with Samsung, and the Samsung head actually went to jail for a while, right? And it goes up and down. Honestly, some South Korea's politics is worse than Malaysia's.
Yeah.
Okay. But in the process, what you end up doing is that you develop global brands. Now, in this context, what does brand mean? It means the ownership of the value chain. In contrast to OEMs. OEMs means that the brand owner outsources the bottom part of the value chain to people like us, right? And the difference is that the brand owner, despite only owning about 10% of the value chain, controls 50% of the margins, right? Because we are just doing a voluminous low value added manufacturing, right? On their behalf. So Korea is the unicorn example of a national economic development because they ultimately develop a lot of industrial brands, right? Your Kias, your Hyundais, your Samsungs. Why are industrial brands important for an emerging economy? Because an emerging economy's goal is to transition from agriculture to manufacturing and then to leapfrog that into the service, right? Service means you're high income already. So manufacturing is where your industrial economy matters, right? And if you have a manufacturing powerhouse brand that you can sell to exporters, like your Kia cars, your Samsung fridges, right? You need a lot of industrial development locally in order to realize those exports.
Yeah.
Right? So for instance, a car, think about what goes into a car, right? You have steel, you have glass, you have bolts, you have nuts, you have semiconductors, you have everything. So you need all these local industries to develop before you can even start building a car. And then if you just build a car for local consumption, that's great. If you can build a car for external consumption, that's current account surplus. And when you are a small South Korean economy in the 1970s, that's amazing. Right. So what was our attempt at that? It was Proton.
Which obviously...
Right? So I have a joke, right? I talk to my fellow economists. Vin Diesel comes up in a Proton, right? And then he looks around and he said, do you know what they call this car in Malaysia? Proton, right? Which is quite sarcastic now because we know that Proton has more or less diminished.
It belongs to China.
But the word, right, Proton encapsulates a lot of ambition, right? Speed, all this. That was our Kia, our Hyundai attempt. And it failed for lots of reasons. But anyway, we actually made an honest attempt at it. Ultimately, Malaysia ended up like Poland, which is a lot of OEMs, right, without brand ownership. So we keep a lot less of the margin, but we're doing most of the work, most of the manufacturing. So this is the context of Mahathir's industrial policy, right? HICOM, do you know what it means? Heavy industrial companies of Malaysia. Right. It was the leftovers of the conglomerated, right? When we started shifting towards more high income. So the high income barrier threshold is 30,000 USD, right? If you take all the emerging economies of the world today, right, or even those that started in the 1950s, and you put it here, Malaysia is easily in the first quartile. Right? That is how much further, as evidenced by the fact that Indonesia, Vietnam are down there, right? India, including China. What's China's GDP per capita? I can't remember. I think it's lower than Malaysia.
9 or 10.
Yeah, 9 or 10, right? So This is what I mean by Malaysia is ultimately a small cap in the world, right?
A pretty efficient one.
Yeah, that has rose from a very low base.
Yeah.
And not only that, somehow we have managed to develop our own sustainable internal service economy, right? To be able to do that in a very diversified manner, right, is no small feat, It's really, really hard to do that.
Right.
If you look at Indonesia, right, Indonesia's model.
Yeah. Maybe let's go into each of the
Yes.
ASEAN countries and see how we stack up with them.
Yes.
And why, obviously, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you are ranking ourselves higher than the rest.
Correct. So can you go to a new tab, go to Google NOAA opinion, you know as well?
Yes.
NOAA opinion, and then type Indonesia. Then you go.
Let's go straight to his website.
Yeah, if you go to the website, you will scroll. You just Google it, NOAA opinion,
Okay.
and then type Indonesia. So what you will see is that before China became the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, due to the post-WTO agreement in 2001, right? You know who was the manufacturing powerhouse of the world? It was Indonesia. When you hear about all those sweatshots about Nike, right? That was an Indonesian factory. The problem is that after the Suharto decline, right, the Asian financial crisis, there was a huge shift away from manufacturing back to agricultural.
Oh, so it's a bit like a deindustrialization.
Yes. So agriculture, keep in mind, doesn't just mean soft commodities like your food stuff, right? It includes commodities, right? So a lot of export of just base materials, right? I cannot remember the exact reason, but no opinion just explain it here. So if you look at manufacturing, right, percentage of GDP after the 2000s, right, it just never recovered, right, going back to all the way to 1990.
Yeah.
Right? And what happened here? The reason is because mainly benefited. Okay. Right. The reason is because of China, because China came back up and it had a lot of very favorable trade deals, right? So basically, it took market share away from Indonesia's manufacturing, right? But Indonesia is also again poised for good fortunes in the next generation. But putting that aside, right, we can see how Indonesia's economy deindustrialized, and let's not even talk about graduating to service economy, right? It is very concentrated. If you want to talk about chaebols, right, Indonesia is a really fascinating economy. It has a lot of parallels to both China and Korea. So let me give you an example. A lot of chaebol like family conglomerates.
Yep.
In Malaysia, how many can you really think of? Right, like really like government beneficiaries. Few, right? In Indonesia, you have like straight up 15 off the top of your head.
Actually,
right?
it's great that you mentioned if you look at our export guys, right? The E&E guys did it by themselves with obviously the help of the pioneer tax status, but that was afforded to everybody, right? Not just one person. Oil and gas, but Petronas is really a state-owned thingy.
Yeah.
The glove guys did it on themselves. The plastic guys did it by themselves. All the exporters did it by themselves. Actually.
Yes. I think a useful analogy to have, right, to remember is that, again, I said before, Malaysia is a small cap economy. It's important to remember that countries themselves, right, are very, very small organizations, right, relative to the rest of the world. So they are subject to all the lacks of economies of scale, all the disadvantages.
Yeah.
Which is where you get all these accusations or allegations of corruption, of concentrated power, right? The reason is because they are operating like a small business and they have to.
Yeah,
right?
and of course, if they don't concentrate, how are they going to make money? I mean, Singapore is the best example. The concentration of wealth is very high in the government.
Correct.
Your Tomasics of these worlds and stuff like that. But if they don't do that, like how many slices of pie can you split between, I don't know, power pie between 5 million people?
No, more importantly is that you have to fight with your competitors, which is other countries, other economies, right? So in an industrial economy, the way you do that is economies of scale, right? And these economies of scale, this chaebol model, is not exclusive to just Malaysia or Korea. It started with the Zaibatsu in Japan, which then become today's Keiretsu, right? The Shoshas, right? The six that Warren Buffett invested in.
Yes.
And then that model was copied successfully by South Korea, the chaebols. And then it became the Zituan Feiyue in China today. Your Alibabas, your Tencents, right?
Yeah, the bad.
It's all an economies of scale PPP story. And then in Malaysia, it was a high comps, right?
Which didn't work out lah.
Yes, and in fact, Vietnam, you're seeing a lot of that as well, right? So your Vin something, right? I forgot. That is the huge, gigantic conglomerate, which is like, I don't know, Samsung level representation of economy, right? Cambodia, don't talk about it. Myanmar also don't need to talk about it, right? Laos, different story, very poor economy. Thailand is less about concentration of wealth and just more about like complete destabilization of politics. Right?
Yeah.
We can go into that, but let's not do it.
But yeah, so I mean, when you look, so you mentioned that when we compare ourselves with Indonesia, Indonesia obviously has the deindustrialization problem,
Yeah.
which ranks us higher. But how about moving on to let's say Thailand? What are our advantages?
No, Thailand is really just a very polarized political environment.
Okay.
Right? That is the real bottleneck because you have the red shirts represented by the elites and the business community, and the yellow shirts represented by the poor, basically the Thaksin branch, right? And the problem about Thailand is that Bangkok alone is something like 15% of GDP, similar to Jakarta, Greater Jakarta area. The reason being that if you look at the map on Bangkok, right? Maybe you can open the Google Maps of Bangkok. Try and see. You will notice, right, that Bangkok is one gigantic metropolis, right? And then the roads, right, they are all spiderweb towards the capital inside. And so the context is this, right? Bangkok, yeah.
Zoom out a bit.
Okay, yeah, you see, if you zoom out, right, you will see that Bangkok is a very small part of Thailand. Right? I was surprised. I'm repeatedly surprised by how large of a landmass Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar.
Oh, they're huge, man.
Myanmar is gigantic. It is extremely huge. Right? Look at Malaysia's peninsula. We are tiny in comparison. Okay. So look, if you look closer to Bangkok, why are there so many? You go to Bangkok a lot, is it?
Yeah. Hey, Jonathan.
Okay. So anyway, let's not look at your tourism itinerary. But if you look at Bangkok, right, the roads all lead in a sort of a spiderweb formation to the central area. And Bangkok alone, another context is that it is 15% of its, I think more or less there, 15-20%
for a city,
which means that the contribution, if you log jam this one economy, right, city economy, the whole country grinds down to a halt.
Yes.
And all the political administrative centers are all in the middle there. So what happens is that if you want to log jam the whole country, right, just throw a protest in the middle of Bangkok, right, which is what happens, right, and then the whole country grinds to a halt in terms of economic contribution, right, and you're not going to be able to change the roads like overnight, right. Of course, the government could move the capital, but again, right, before it does that, it is very subject to protest risk compared to, let's say, you go and do a protest in Malaysia, in KL, right. The economic centers in KL is quite well distributed as it is in most countries. You have KL, you have Johor, you have Penang, you have right. So if one shuts down, the others still continue chugging along fine, right? This one you can just do a massive sit down in the capital, right, for 1 month, and the government needs to start talking to you, right? So Thailand's issue is okay. The economy is also not really good because okay, let's finish this one first. Political because of this, right? And very, very polarized, split in the middle kind of political polity. 2, their economy is very hostage to outsiders. 20% of them are tourism, right? Maybe 17%. You can probably Google, right? What is the share of exports to GDP? So it is also some large amount. Which is why you may have noticed that very uniquely, Thailand's policy rate, the central bank rate, is close to 1%, even prior to COVID. So when COVID hit, they had to lower it, right? And then even today, it's only like 1.5%. There's not a lot of risk headroom in terms of monetary policy.
Yeah.
And the reason that we keep it so low is because the growth is just not there organically, right? Or rather, it is subject to the winds and fancies of the external economy, right? If that year has a lot of good trade, China reopens, well, Thailand is going to do really well. If China closes down as it has for most of the past 3 years, your tourism, 20% of GDP is gone.
Yeah.
Right? So, right,
you can see
17, 18%. I mean, that is a crazy amount to be hostage to your outsiders, right? on top of your exports, which is again very large. And most of the rest of the economy is a very subsistence agricultural based economy. It's not a robust service. This is the external service based economy. Malaysia's service economy is very internal. It's like the US.
Yes.
Right? So why do I say Malaysia is like US of ASEAN? The Malaysian economy is very draws a lot of parallels to the US economy. It's very diversified, relatively speaking, right? It has a huge internal service contribution, right? It is not hostage to external forces, right? And the government, because of this, right, the double-edged sword is that you get low growth because it's so diversified, but the government is more or less in control of its own destiny. It can plan 10 years ahead, 20 years ahead, kind of thing. When you hear people complain about Malaysia, it's always in the context of what can a government do, right, for the country. It's not really about how can outsiders affect us.
Yes.
Right? All our problems is internal. It's not really like, maybe now got like, China interfere, US interfere, you know what I mean? But more or less, right, you don't hear things like, is Indonesia going to do confrontasi, it's going to affect our economy.
Yeah.
Right? For Thailand, they got to worry about South Korea. They got to worry about China. Right?
Wait, why does Thailand have to worry about South Korea?
Because they export a lot of auto parts to South Korea.
Oh, right. Okay.
Right? And they get a lot of tourism income from China. So one of the companies on my blog, right, Do They Dream, is a skincare company, quite a well-known brand locally, right? Maybe the number one local brand in skincare in Thailand. When China shut down, right, their tourism revenue basically evaporated overnight.
Yeah.
Right. So think of a Malaysian company which has a similar kind of profile, something like, I don't know, something that is really hostage to a volatile external revenue receipts. What Malaysian company has that? See, one thing also is struggle.
No, not easy.
Right? We are very I think people tend to grass is always greener on the other side. So yes, we have very low growth, right? As a function of being diversified. But low growth also means we have very low risk, relatively speaking, right? And because grass is always greener on the side, people don't really talk about it.
Right.
But once you move to Thailand and get a Thailand citizenship, then you will start worrying about the risk side.
Right.
Right? So at the end of the day, it's about trade-offs, net trade-offs, right? And given that you couldn't even choose where you were going to be born in the world anyway, right? Throw you a random spot on the map, I can assure you, the fact that you were planted in Malaysia, right? You should really be thankful for it.
Yeah.
If you were in Indonesia, in an ex-tier 1 city, right, you will probably be running some warung, right? Selling spices or Indomie packets, right? If you were in Vietnam, you'll be working for one of Paul Huat's factories, right? Making one of those, right? Even if you were in China, right? It's a dice toss whether you end up as one of the rich elites or one of the people working in the Foxconn factories.
But actually,
Right.
most people are not well off in China, by and large.
Yeah. No, straight up, most people are just not well off in the world.
Yeah.
If you are able to listen to this podcast,
Yes.
more or less you are the T20 of the world,
Yes.
global population, right? And there's nothing to be ashamed about being middle class. Middle class is really solid from a historical perspective.
Yeah.
Like people who live with iPhones and stuff, right?
You're better than Rockefeller already.
No,
John
you think
Rockefeller.
you think about the royalty of the Middle Ages, right? They don't live as comfortably as us,
Nowhere. Yeah.
right? The only reason you feel depressed is because
You're comparing.
not just you lah. There's plenty of advertisement telling you that
Yes.
you're underperforming. Right? You are a loser if you don't buy a house by 30. You're a loser if you don't get married by 30.
Yeah.
Right? And if you fall for it, then you will have low self-esteem.
Yeah.
But one thing great about being an economist, right, is you really get a historical perspective on things. Right? And you realize where the true median is, right? And by virtue of the fact that you are significantly above to the right of the median, when you're talking about coin toss or things that depend on luck, like where you were born, what wealth class you were born in, right? Things that you have zero control to begin with, right? Like for me, right, I'm middle class. So what is there to complain about in Malaysia, middle class? There's really nothing to complain.
Yeah.
No volcanoes. We weren't born in Ukraine, right? Even if you were born in America in the 1960s, you will go to the Korean War and die there. Right? So there's relative to like dice roll considerations, right? There's really not a lot of
Yeah.
complaint about that. Right? You only complain about if you listen to people telling you that you are not good enough for their own reasons.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So and even just from an objective standpoint, right, I've just described Malaysia as a matter of national economic development, right, is really, really high up there from an emerging market standpoint. Right? Like to reach a point where you can graduate into high income status, $30,000 per capita, service-based economy, diversified economy, right? Diversified means really relatively low risk, you know. And then more or less in control of your currency risk exposure, right? With huge tailwinds coming, right? I've described before, I think, on your previous podcast about the semiconductor sector, about the fact that we control half of the Malacca Straits, right, which is 80% of China's oil and gas imports, right? And the geopolitical significance of the Indo-Pacific happening just at this point in time, right? Imagine if you're an Indian, right, in India, you know, you gotta wait for your son's turn, right, when India becomes China, right? Or for that matter, if you were a low-income Chinese, right, in China, yeah, you gotta wait for the next generation before you can say all these things. Now we are enjoying all the fruits of geopolitics significance, right? Coalescing around this part of the world. That's all luck, you know, right? So if you're a Malaysian business, I can tell you as a matter of fact, Malaysia GDP is going to grow from here, right? As a matter of external factors, nothing to do with our own credit, right? It's just a really lucky time, right? The analogy being similar to China post WTO.
Yeah.
Right? So you know, a lot of people like to say that China raised 400 billion out of poverty over the past 20 years, right? Well, that same phenomenon is going to happen for ASEAN, right? Mostly in Indonesia and Philippines, just by virtue of their population and low base effect. But Malaysia, other than Singapore, is the only nation, and Brunei, right, is the only nation that has a relatively robust bureaucracy at scale. So our ease of doing business index,
Yes.
we're really high on the index, right? We have very good red tape. So red tape, people always complain about red tape in terms of slow, right? Inefficient. But red tape also means things are established. Institutions are strong, right? So again, grass is always greener on the other side. Try and go do business in Vietnam, right? I've heard anecdotally that everything requires under the table,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, foreign companies who go to Vietnam to do business don't actually go there and do their own business. They establish a Vietnam subsidiary, right? Let a local Vietnamese run it, and then use a royalty system. Why? Because they have no confidence of observing the culture of that, right? I mean, we could really go into it, all the comparisons. Like Thailand, right, is known for being a culture of liars. Right? Like straight up, Thailanders will tell you that are kind of proud of the fact that they are liars.
Wow.
Right? Please, don't. I'm not racist. Okay. And then Indonesia, right? Indonesia is a really, really fascinating economy. Indonesia, they have a lot of natural resources. They have a lot of chaebol-like business dynasties, right?
That's
So the
Salim
economies
Group,
of scale
right?
are there, right? Yes, Salim Group is one. The largest instant noodle manufacturer in the world. And their politics, right, is just next level of chaotic. If you think, Malaysia, right, we are chaotic because in terms of the top guy changing all the time, right? That's kind of it. Indonesia started from a very socialist background, right?
Yeah,
Because
Sukarno, right?
yes, because they were pretty much abused by the Dutch. And then after that, it was developed into corruption-based Chukong relationship between Suharto and the current business dynasty owners, like your Salims, what's the guy's name? You get the point, right? And then you have your very Islamic nationalists. You have a very strong communist participation there, right? The PKI. And then you have your nationalists like Golkar, right? Which is your Bumbung Yudhihano. What's his name, right? You heard before, right?
I've not heard this.
The guy who, yeah. As well as your PKI, which is your Jokowi, right? Your Megawatis, right? I can tell you that Indonesia's political scene, right, is way more complex than Malaysia. Malaysia is pretty straight up, in Malay versus Chinese.
Yeah.
And then within the Malay branches, you
Liberal
have infighting
yeah.
for individual self-interest. It's not an ideological component, which is a lot harder to overcome, right? Yeah, the individual self-interest is really a lot about corruption, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Right? That's a lot easier to overcome, right? Than someone who believes socialist is the way, communist is the way, Islam is the way. You know what I mean? Like the people will die for that, People won't die for self-interest, right?
Right.
Philippines, again, right? You have the rise of Marcos Jr., whose father was infamously responsible for the purges of the People's Power Party, right? And then the subsequent, People's Power Party was the subsequent Aquinos revolution, who was killed, right, on the airport tarmac, right, on his way back from overseas, and then replaced by his wife. And then subsequently you had, what was after Aquinos? And then Duterte, right? So the Duterte, I mean, if you really want to go into the really like sneaky stuff, right, we can.
It's fine lah.
Yeah,
but of course, one question, maybe this is my last question, and Leon, you can follow up after that, is Singapore, right?
Yes.
They are the heart of ASEAN, whether we like it or not. They are the richest on a per capita basis.
Yeah.
And of course, they are the envy of a lot of Malaysians. But what will you say to this whole situation?
I think first of all, it's important to remember that Singapore is basically a city. Right?
Yeah.
So it's a lot easier to administrate
the pebble
a city.
down style, yeah.
Yeah, than to administrate a country, right? Like, I'm not sure if you know this, but the median household income of Malaysia is something like 7,000. So for a 2-person household, it's 3,005, right? That is more typical of a country with large populations, right? What you get from Singapore, Hong Kong, that likes, right, is really special because it's a city, right? Like, I'm not sure if you've been to Singapore.
Oh yeah, many times. Yeah.
Yeah, you have people like just holding signs at the MRT telling you to line up, right? And then the sweepers are just a dime a dozen on the street, right? So these are government jobs because the country only has to make expenses at the city scale in mind, right? MRTs can arrive once every 2 minutes. I heard people complaining at when you arrive at 3 minutes, they start complaining. 3-minute interval. In Malaysia, it's more like 10 minutes, right? Why? Because the MRT has to travel a much further distance.
And it's always expanding.
Yes.
Right? Last time there was no Sri Petaling, no Setia Alam. Now there's Setia Alam, Sri Petaling.
Correct.
But Singapore is just Singapore.
Correct.
Right? Reclaim land, that's it.
Yes. And Singapore is also quite contingent on external trade.
Yes.
For its
much more contingent.
Yes. So and as well as for its protection, right? So it is really very hostage to external politics. Yeah. Right. So
I would say like even though they earn a lot more, I think my guess is that their cost difference is bigger than their earnings difference in compared to Malaysia. It means another discussion. No, like for example, I mean, that's why they have the HDB, right? They need to subsidize housing costs.
Oh, yes.
For people earning Singapore money.
Yeah.
Right? We have no such HDB in Malaysia. I wish there was HDB where 30-40%. I mean on a selfish level where I'll get a 30-40% discount on my houses.
I mean, I'm not sure because what I've heard is that HDBs have risen in price quite a bit.
It has, but the way HDB functions is that it takes away the land cost for Singaporeans. Yeah, see, a lot of people don't know this. Like, so it's the equivalent. Okay, what is the median household price in Malaysia? I'm sure you know this.
No, median. Oh, no,
yeah,
I don't know.
Okay, it's about 500,000.
Okay.
If we had a HDB, that would be equivalent, right, of us having our median price drop from 500 to 300,000. Because the land cost has been taken away. The government subsidized this.
No, here's the thing, right? That is a decent apples to apples comparison, but it's not realistic in reality. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I know lah. But I'm just saying, right? I believe that the cost food outside of food, right, is a lot higher compared to the earnings potential.
Sure.
I think we saw a street interview, right? I sent you.
Yes.
Everyone was like, if you ask Malaysians, like how much do they need a month to be satisfied, right? I think most of them will say, you know,
I mean,
Most
for a
urbanites,
single,
right?
for like,
for a single person, right?
Yeah.
What would you say as a single person? Urbanite.
in KL.
You mean to be satisfied means comfortable lah.
Yeah, to be enough.
3K?
Nah.
3.
Yeah. But Aaron is a special breed.
Yeah, I would say between at least 5 to 6.
So it also
Yeah.
depends on what you mean by comfort lah. Right?
Yeah,
If you're talking
correct.
about
I think
No, but it's a general point. Everybody has their own vision, right?
Yeah.
So you know what the Singaporeans answer? 10K Sing dollars.
No, 10, 12K.
10, 12K Sing dollars.
yeah.
Then if combined must be double or triple that.
Sure. Yeah.
And the people who being interviewed, they were singles.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were singles. And
So
when
is
we-
it, obviously it's not a very scientific comparison.
Yeah.
But the general point is that the dollar here
Yes.
is a lot more relevant, a lot stretchable than the dollar
Yes.
in Singapore.
No, I think
Food aside, their food is really cheap.
I understand where you're coming from. Where
Yeah.
the premise is you're comparing between Malaysia and Singapore.
Correct.
I would ask you to zoom out a little bit compared to the whole world, right? City-states are actually an anomaly, right?
Correct.
Like, how many are there? There are Vatican City,
Yes.
Hong Kong.
And that's why Singapore is a lot better than Hong Kong for me to
Yeah.
live. 100%.
No, like you, I don't think it's even an apples to apples comparison to put a city-state versus a country because
Exactly.
the expenditure, the allocation, right?
Correct.
The contribution, they're all very, very different. Right? Just as an example, you could impose GST on or increase GST on Singapore recently, right? And people don't really riot because they're rich enough, right? Like your per capita distribution of GDP, right, is just a lot more democratic when there's so much fewer people to consider. Think about it this way, like if KL were in isolation, right, it would be a lot easier to administrate
Yes.
than the whole of Malaysia, including your Sarawak, Borneo states. Right? You know how complex politics becomes the bigger your scale is.
Of course.
Right? Yeah. I mean, you think about it in terms of politics, right? Instead of economy, then you will start to see why you cannot really compare it
Exactly.
as apples to apples thing. Right?
For sure.
Like Anwar has to please Abang Joe. He has to please what's
Yeah.
the Sabah guy's name? Right?
At least Singapore doesn't care lah.
Yeah, right. Pretty straight up, right? You can just like
He's
Don't care.
backyard lah.
yeah. And we don't even need to go into like the dictatorship aspect.
course.
We're just talking about scale, right? It's not apples to apples at
Yep.
all. I think people who make that comparison are making a comparison because someone gave them the idea.
Correct.
Right? If you are truly an economist and look at things scale, so compare Malaysia and Singapore and South Korea, Malaysia and Singapore and China, Malaysia and Singapore and I know Cuba, right? You know that there are 197 countries in the UN. Right? Malaysia is easily number 75. Right? I mean, you compare us to like Tuvalu, right? Ethiopia, Turkey, right? Things that are not in the news, Syria, right? If we're talking about where could I have been born, just throw a dice roll, right? Yeah, I could be born there. Chile. You know, Chile to this day is still having still the political situation is still very, very shaky.
Yeah.
Argentina, Venezuela, Mexico, just a doorstep away from Texas, right? And for that matter, right, you could have been born in straight up like Iowa, within the USA, right, and not do well. You could have been born in Kuantan, right, and not be as well as off as an urbanite, right. So when you're talking about luckiness, right,
Yes.
if you're an urbanite in Malaysia, you are globally really, really lucky already.
Yeah. So I think that's it from me. Leon, do you have any questions?
Yes, I think maybe for the benefits of FIRL's listeners, right? Like all the things that we've talked about in this podcast, you know, like the macroeconomic indicators for Malaysia in comparison to the other ASEAN countries, right? So of course, this is not anything to indicate any form of financial advice, but you know, after talking about all of this, how can people who are looking to invest into stocks apply this knowledge, right? Like, what are you bullish in ASEAN in general? And if yes, like how does one capitalize on this knowledge in order to invest and make money? Of course, saying again, not financial advice.
Yeah, okay. So when we're talking about macroeconomics, right, you have to work with country level timeframes. So to see the fruit of these discussions, everything we discuss,
Yes.
it's a minimum of 10 years kind of thing.
Yes,
right?
yes.
So it's not going to be like, oh, what's going to happen in the next 2 years, like that's just not how it works, right? But if you're talking about like secular long-term tailwinds, right? Yeah, I mean, Penang is 7% of global TAM for semiconductor testing equipment,
Yes.
right? Trailing edge semiconductor sector will be dominated by China, right? To a huge extent, right? So, those call it 14 nanometer and above kind of thing that goes into your cars, your calculators, your 5G base stations, right? Those things will be dominated by China, and Penang is going to be a huge beneficiary of it. If you're talking about oil and gas, right? So Malaysia is a huge or relatively large oil and gas producer, right? And wow, the oil and gas story globally, the secular undersupply story is just incredible, extremely amazing, right? I know oil prices are down now, but there's a Bloomberg interview, right, where analyst is basically saying, it was asked, why are oil prices down after everything you said, which is very bullish? And the answer was, we don't know, right? We're just monitoring, right? So there is probably some good reason for it, but we don't know what is it. But what I can say for sure is that it does not reflect anywhere close to the demand supply situation globally, secularly, right? I have an article on CNI, Canadian National Railway, which is basically commodities, picks and shovels kind of thing, right? And you can go and read out on why oil and gas will continue to dominate our lifetimes, right? This lifetime. So oil and gas is also like wow, in terms of and then you have a lot of, so the EV transition is also going to dominate, right? It's just that oil and gas is not going to sit as badly as people think. Indonesia has a huge nickel, right, non-blood diamond kind of situation for battery manufacturing.
Yes.
Right?
Tesla.
Like I said, Malacca Straits represents 20% of China's oil and gas imports. Sorry, 80%, right? So anything to do with that is going to be very geopolitically important.
Very interesting.
Right? Indonesia is 274 million population, right? If you really go into it, like I have in my Bukalapak articles, you will see that the economy is a lot of potential, very diversified, and starting from an incredibly low base relative to their potential, right? Philippines has half of Indonesia's population, 130 million, is also becoming very geopolitically significant because of the first island chain, right? And recently it has picked a side, right? So again, it's a low base effect. So what a low base effect does, right, is basically you have a working age population which is young. Then what that does for your GDP growth is that they have a lot of discretionary income. Disposable means what you take home. Discretionary means after your fixed expenses like your food, your mortgage, your car installments, right? Discretionary income growth of these units, right, start from a significantly lower base than what Malaysian urbanites are familiar with. And the growth rate from there is just going to be amazing. Just think about it. Vietnam's GDP growth, right, for the next 10 years is about 7% forecasted. CAGR, okay, 7% CAGR. I think your discretionary income growth is going to be significantly more than that, double, maybe even triple. Right? So think about what that would mean for
the consumption.
Right? Yeah, I mean, like your LCCs, right? Right? And LCC
low
is
cost
not,
carriers, right? LCCs, yeah.
That's not a Vietnam specific. That's not a Vietjet thing, That's
the ASEAN thing.
Yeah, right. It's all ASEAN airlines with the open sky policy, right? Thailand. Okay, I don't know much about Thailand. Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines. Singapore is going to become an international hub for ASEAN, right? And Malaysia, like I said, very good ease of doing business, strong bureaucratic institutions, and a 20% Chinese population, right? So I know some people might say that it's not that important. Some economists might say that, which is true relative to the underlying stuff like your strong bureaucratic institutions, your fiscal position. But that is universal across all industries. So you have added like a teaser, like a dessert, right? Which is you have a huge Chinese base with a huge semiconductor industry, which for some fortuitous reason is suddenly becoming very geopolitically significant, right? Like, I mean, 5 years ago, nobody was talking about it.
Yep.
Right? And we're talking about countries, we're talking about generational time spans.
Yep.
Right? I mean, think about something like India, you know, a very centralized economy with a very politically dominant regime, right? Very diversified and non-administratively convenient cultural base, right? The states there is just like, I don't know, I think there are like, what, 100 different right cultures, and they all have their own internal caste.
Exactly.
Like, you don't even need to be racist to be discriminated, right? So sorry, Indians, okay, not being racist here, but you get the point now, you know. Like, ASEAN is just in this like really lucky timeline, right? Like, everything just seems to be moving to it. On top of that, you have the shift of manufacturing economy out of China due to two things. One, a higher labor pool cost. So now we are replacing them, right? Vietnam is already halfway there. And two, also the geopolitical situation, right? So, you know, let's say you're a iPhone manufacturer, right? You could move to Vietnam, right? But then maybe your democratic sensitivities might be affected by their communist regime, right? Then you might move to Singapore because it's very legal, right? Lawful. But you know, you won't have enough land to build your factories. So you may incorporate headquarters in Singapore, and then you might choose between Indonesia or Malaysia.
Open the
Right?
manufacturing
Open a factory.
plants, right?
And where will you open if you were Foxconn with a Chinese management team? Maybe Foxconn is a bad example, but you get my point, right? Johor, east of Johor, total. You know how big Johor is? Have you seen a map of Johor? Let's just.
It's big, yeah.
It's huge. You know, the amount of empty land there, like Muar, your upper regions, right? Johor. Just enter. Yeah.
I mean, there's Pengerang as well. Don't forget.
Pengerang is on the east, right? Or is it the west?
East, I think.
My mouse no more battery already. Just click.
Alright.
Right? You just look at how Singapore the size, right? And then you scroll out and then you look at the whole of Johor.
It's a pebble.
Right? Do you know how much undeveloped land there is all the way to Gemas? Right? There's so much undeveloped land, and the east coast is prime for another terminal, you know.
Yeah.
And the ECRL is running along there. So when that's completed, when the China One Belt One Road policy is effected in ASEAN in, let's say, the next 10 years, plus a HSR coming down from KL, right, that leads all the way to Laos, right, through Thailand. Just think about how much external GDP contribution there is going to be. Current account surplus, as well as the multiplier effect on the local consumption, local economy. So all your Mersing, Kangka Tambang, I'm a Malaysian, sorry, I've never heard of it before. Kuala Lumpur, okay, right? This area, right, is, if you put a port at Mersing, right, a gigantic free trade zone, I tell you, the multiplier effect in this area is just going to be incredible, right? And then you have Tioman there, right, which is already a globally recognized location, right? That's just Malacca, you know. Talk about Kelantan.
Johor, I mean.
Sorry, this is by Johor, right? Talk about go up to Terengganu, Kelantan. Anecdotally, one of my friends is one of the biggest coffee bean suppliers. And he say his highest growth in terms of volume is now coming from Kelantan, which is very surprising because you don't tend to associate Kelantan with like
Coffee
discretionary income wealth.
Yeah.
Right? Discretionary income spending. And I asked him why, because I know the context. He is one of the bigger suppliers in KL. So he says growth. So KL is big volume-wise, but already saturated, right? People, I've done the math, right? Short version, right? People will spend, not people, one cafe in Kelantan, right, can generate up to 400 ringgit of receipts from coffee alone.
A day.
A day. One cafe, right? And he said, if you stay in KL, you will not know this. If you actually go to Kelantan, you will see a lot of new wealth being created. So someone who is a typical DAP voter, right, will probably not know this, because you don't even bother to look.
Correct.
You actually go
What
there.
is
Right?
Kelantan? Also?
So then, right, my question then becomes, where is the money coming from? I suspect there's a lot of East Coast trade coming in. Right? It's just that we don't hear it in the news because it's just not popular enough or not depressing enough. Right?
Yeah,
And there's also
very
one more,
interesting.
there's a 5 billion Alliance Steel investment
Yes.
in a Malaysia China industrial park in
In
Kuantan.
Pahang.
Actually, you go to my 4Q GDP. So this is a relatively recent investment that didn't make any headlines, but it's 5 billion in size, And this is just one project of a huge industrial park, basically a free trade zone, right? No, free tax industrial park, 5 billion for one project, And
In
look at what the
Kuantan,
name is. It's called Malaysia China Kuantan Industrial Park, MCKIP.
What the industries that are going to be there will be the semicons and all that.
No. Semicon will be on the Bayan Lepas side,
Right.
or the Seberang Perai side. This one will be more in typical China
Industrial
factory.
products.
Yes,
Yeah.
low value added manufacturing, like your widgets, right? They are moving out of China because of higher costs
Very nice.
to Kuantan, which presumably still has.
Yay, Pahang.
And I haven't even
Finally, East Coast being relevant.
ECIL. I tell you, that is a huge
Finally,
multiplier.
the East Coast is relevant.
And
Because I read, I just a fun story, right? When the election happened, right, and we all know how divided it was. I was just thinking, what if we split Semenanjung? We take Penang, Perak, KL Selangor, Negeri Sembilan, Melaka. I don't know about Negeri Sembilan. I don't know what else is there except Siupa and Anthony Lok. Melaka and then Johor will be on the government side, and then let Kedah, Kelantan, Pahang, and Perlis to be on the other side. Because I was thinking, like, what the hell do they have? Apart from Genting, outside of Genting, I don't have a reason to visit any of these areas, right? Kedah, nothing.
No,
with this, right? Maybe I'm eating my own words.
No, honestly, I'm quite open to going up there for holiday with my friends, just to have a look.
Yeah, Redang, I would say Redang, Genting, Keropok Leko, and what's in Kedah?
No, I tell
Scenery? I don't know.
you where you go.
Scomnet is in Kedah.
Scomnet, yeah, Scomnet.
You go to YouTube, right?
Yeah.
You go and search. Those Angmoa.
Yeah.
They had the Caucasians, right? They have those.
They travel around Malaysia.
Then you specifically search Kuantan or Terengganu, you see it's quite different from what you expect. Okay, I haven't even gotten to Sarawak. Sarawak, right, is its own internal state economy, right, being managed independently of Putrajaya, right, effectively.
Yeah.
Right. Go talk to a Sarawakian, right, to tell you about what the typical Sarawak polity thinks about, right. It is really an industrial story, growth story. Right? There is a lot going on there since GPS came to power. Seriously, the thing is that most people only rely on news that is fed to them, spoon-fed to them, right? So obviously, if it's spoon-fed to you and the algorithm thinks you like cats, you're only going to see cat videos, right? If you actually step out of your comfort zone and just Google stuff, it's immediately available, right?
Yeah.
You will see there's a lot of development activity going on in Malaysia, which is relevant to our current industrial life cycle. Current national economic development life cycle, right? And there's a lot of reason to be optimistic of foreign contribution to our GDP in the next decade or so.
Yeah, easily.
I can honestly say, right, in 10 years' time, Malaysia is going to be different. And this is echoed by one of my UK friends who is a really I really look up to his macro research skills. Right? He comes here, he says that Malaysia may, you may see all the news about 1MDB and stuff from outside. But when I come here, I see the huge difference when I was here like 12 years ago, right? In terms of like the development that has been going on, the MRT, right? And also your institutions are very robust because even though your political situation is like this,
it's still functioning. Yeah.
Yeah, your poor guys, right? He didn't say poor lah. Your people who are middle income, middle class, and even to some extent upper class, just don't get affected in their day to day.
100%.
As opposed to something like even the US, every time the administration changes, right, your small guy gets affected by the policy shift, right? in terms of like gun favoritism,
Yeah.
in terms of oil and gas, jobs in the commodity sector, the renewable sector. By virtue of its very melting pot population, diverse base, right, with lots of ideologies, right, America's polity is very, very, I wouldn't use the word fractured. It's very, very fluid. Right? Every time you change from Republican to Democrat, right, there is a huge change that affects the day-to-day life of the small guy. In Malaysia, not so, you know. Right? No matter who is on top, right, we don't really feel the end. 90% of our life just doesn't get affected. You know what gets affected? Only the stuff that other people tell you.
Yes.
That's where you start getting angry. Right?
Correct.
If nobody came and tell you, let's say you shut yourself under a rock, you probably wouldn't even notice it. Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So even a guy from the UK, very respectable macro analyst with a lot of historical background, right, can tell you that Malaysian institutions are strong.
And if he's from the UK, he knows what bad government is and what bad economy is.
Yeah.
So look, it's great. I'm sure, I mean, as usual, there's a lot more to talk about. But before I let you go, I actually wrote a tweet about 2 weeks ago.
Talk about what your handle is.
It's at MJ Gunny GNNY. But the tweet was this, $32.5 billion US was added to the Malaysian economy in 2020, 8.7% growth. That's more than Philippines, which had 30 billion, Vietnam 29 billion, Thailand 16 billion, Singapore 15 billion. Only losing out to Indonesia, which is about 63 billion. For obvious reasons, I mean, they're like huge. How did you take advantage of this? Or did you spend most days complaining about how bad the economy is? When you put it in those perspectives, maybe you can pull up. When you put it in those perspectives, right, it gets you to think as a Malaysian, right? Because 32.5 billion USD was added into the economy. That's roughly 130 billion. And here you are saying that, there you go.
Yeah.
Here you are saying that, complaining about this and whatever.
Yeah.
And I know for a fact that many people are taking advantage, and the people who are taking advantage of this are not the ones complaining. Right?
Okay.
That's my point of view.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd end the podcast with that. I think everyone knows where to find you already, right? They can watch the previous podcast, and then of course we put links in the comment and sections. But Leon, any final words before we sign off?
No.
Yeah, actually, if you want to have fun, right, you can go to the pocket stats.
Yeah.
The second tab, you can see the breakdown which sector got the FDI.
Yes. Or you can go to MITI, correct?
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, you can go MITI and see also.
My article actually has an Bloomberg interview with Safro. And he says some interesting stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for staying all the way. It's 2 hours. Fantastic podcast. Thanks for coming on, Aaron. Maybe you can do something different the next round. And guys, as usual, if you like our content, like, comment, subscribe, user stuff, follow us on Spotify as well. Go watch some of our other videos. And signing off. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and Minister Fizi as well as Governor Shamsia. Looking forward to our coffee session.
Yes.